I was in Indonesia in 1998 when the Suharto regime fell, which was a very corrupt government. He was in power for 30 years. His children owned every major piece of infrastructure. And I watched a country stand up and fight for their freedom. I watched them take to the streets at Trisakti University shootings. And then I didn't see what I had seen on the streets reflected in the media. And Mum and Dad explained, it's not a free press here. And I think that really gave me an appreciation of, yes, the media can be scummy, and we've seen examples of that daily, particularly since October 7. But those who are noble and good and decent and who fight for truth and who do their job the way they should do their job, there's almost nothing more important when it comes to helping a democracy thrive and run. And I think this obsession ruined me about telling stories and telling the truth and communicating with people. And so that's kind of where the love came from. But I fell into sport for the first 15 years or so as a sports host, as a sports anchor. When I was hosting rugby league and sport and tennis, the passion that I had was never the game itself or the score or the outcome. It was showing the human side to athletes. I found that this was the most impactful way to have people connect. So I wanted people to watch sport who weren't, those hard-ass, really obsessed kind of, people that that love it, live it, breathe it. And the way that I was able to broaden the audience was to show the human side. And I look at then moving into this space and political commentary, my obsession is people and humans. And I think that's, with October 7 particularly, one thing I never wanted to occur was for people not to understand that 3 kids died in a room, that 2 babies were taken, that these are not just numbers, that these are people. And the way that I managed to connect with people was telling, I might once or twice on a show, I would show a face, I would have a mother, I would talk about a son, I would humanize people. And that was how I was able to connect and make people feel. I was in Canada maybe 2 months ago, and I met the mum of Alex, who was killed at the Nova Festival, this incredible young man who stood outside a shelter and fought off Hamas until the very end, gave his life. There's video of him from their cameras standing outside trying to save. He saved, 7 lives inside. And she made the point to me. She said, everyone knows the names of the hostages, and so they should, and that matters greatly, she said, but almost no one knows the names of the 1,000 that were killed at and it really impacted me, because there was no jealousy there was nothing like that in what she was saying, but she made such a valid point that every single life lost is an entire universe and world to the people around them. And there's this that I talk about my dad all the time, and I think one of the reasons is he was my favorite person in the world, but someone told me years ago, you die twice in this world. It's when you take your final breath, and the second time when people stop saying your name. And I'm very blessed in that my dad was a public figure, so people come up to me every day, and I get emotional because it's such a privilege to feel so much pain at his loss. And I feel the same amount of pain today as I felt 2 years ago when he died. It's such a privilege to hurt so much because he was so amazing, but I get the chance to talk about him all the time, and I do. And I look at other people who might not have had a profile, who might have lost a son or lost a beautiful daughter, and the world isn't saying their name. And that is a tragedy as well to me, because I think the one thing that when you lose someone you love, you want people to remember them, you want people to know how special they were. And when a tragedy happens, it's usually one person or 2 people, and at the time a big deal is made and you get to honor them. And I think when something like this happens, the biggest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, there are so many who didn't get that chance to show the world who they are, and that matters to some people. To some people it doesn't, but to some families it matters, and I want to try and help share their stories as well.
Welcome to another episode of the J100, brought to you by the Allgemeiner. I'm your host, David M. Cohen. Today's guest is someone who has redefined what it means to speak out. You may know Erin Molan as a former sports anchor, the polished face of Australian television, a charismatic voice in rugby league, and a rising star on global platforms. But what you're about to hear isn't just a media veteran telling war stories from the studio. This is the voice of a woman who walked away from mainstream media, or maybe was pushed, and emerged far more dangerous, free. In this conversation, Erin opens up about her evolution, from being raised in the world's largest Muslim country during the fall of Suharto to becoming a powerful advocate for truth in the wake of October 7th. She's not Jewish. She'd never even been to Israel. And yet, when terror struck, her conscience didn't hesitate. She flew in, stood up, and spoke out. Not because of tribal allegiance, but because, in her words, even a quarter of her brain should know which side to choose. This episode is about what happens when a journalist stops trying to please the room and starts trying to save the world. We talk about the human cost of propaganda, the moral confusion of our media ecosystem, and the price you pay in threats, isolation, and danger for telling the truth out loud. Erin doesn't just challenge the dominant narrative. She obliterates it, not with rage, but with reason, not with partisanship, but with piercing clarity. This conversation isn't comfortable. It's not clean, but it is essential. So if you're looking for something safe, soft, and neatly packaged, skip this one. But if you're ready for a wake-up call in the voice of a woman who sacrificed comfort for conviction, keep listening. Erin, thank you for joining us.
David, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to join you. And thank you again so much for honoring me over in America. It was the most incredible emotional occasion. So thank you.
Was your first trip to Israel after October 7th, or you had been there?
It was. No, trip.
Wow.
And I don't think I even had a close Jewish friend prior. I'd never been to Israel. I didn't, in terms of my existence, it wasn't that I had a good friend or my sister had married a Jew, or, there was absolutely zero that would have led me to lean towards Israel. It was just purely, I'm a human being. I have half a brain, even a quarter of a brain should do it. And I watched the atrocities that occurred on that day. And it wasn't even a decision. It was just the most obvious thing. Horrific, murderous terrorists have just slaughtered 1,200 people and taken hostages. Gee, which side will I align myself with? Gosh, what a conundrum.
I got chills from hearing you say that, because I just assumed, again, we don't know each other so well yet. I just assumed you had been to Israel previously, or you at least were connected to the Jewish community. I mean, it's almost astounding to hear that somebody's conscience moved so powerfully, and that you flew to Israel and you basically joined arms. I mean, that's incredible.
Absolutely. Can I tell you, I challenge myself constantly. I listen to other perspectives. I'm constantly absorbing information that I don't particularly find intelligent or useful or I agree with, because I want to make sure I'm not in an echo chamber. And at the end of every night, and it's been every night since October 7, regardless of what has appeared in the media, what I've been told, what I've read, what I've seen, what I've heard, I shut my eyes knowing that I am without any element of doubt on the right side of history, that I am on the side of good against evil, on the side of right against wrong. And that doesn't mean perfection, but my gosh, my belief in this fight and my belief in the legitimacy, not even Israel's right to defend itself, that's utterly ridiculous. Israel, their people demand that they be protected. That is the job of Israel, but the first job of any government, any country, any nation is to protect its people. And I will stand in their corner for eternity, defending their right to do that.
Thank you so much for that. Are people just obtuse? Are people just ignorant? Are people anti-Semitic? I mean, from your perspective, you're exposed to a broader swath of society than I am, presumably. What's your perspective? What are people missing? What don't they understand that people like yourself and Allgemeiner and so many others and Douglas Murray have to fight so hard to communicate this message? It seems so obvious to us, and yet it seems so foreign to others. What, from your unique vantage point, what is that stops people from understanding the difference between good and evil, right and wrong?
It's a great question. I had an encounter yesterday on an airplane, which I'll tell you about in a second. But my experience thus far, I look at these categories of people when it comes to this space. There are malicious, anti-Semitic pieces of shit, essentially, and you can beep that word out. Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear. Who will never change, who you don't want. Write them off. They're not worth fighting for. They're not your people. Then you have a group of useful idiots, essentially, who might look at things or who are desperate to cling on to some leftist ideology, which doesn't make any sense even, because how is it left to rape women and to slaughter children? But people who will look at this and think, oh, colonialism, and not understand for a second what the real situation is, who will attach themselves to this because they think it's cool and they want to be part of something and they want to hate all the things they think Israel represents, and they're completely wrong on all fronts. Then you've got a group of people that are actually not really stupid, who are by all other means quite decent people who are victims of such a sophisticated propaganda system that has been in place well before October, that is being put out there by so many sinister players. There are billions of dollars that are behind it. And I sat next to someone on a plane yesterday, a guy who started a bank, a very well-known person who's got a Jewish family member who'd married into his family. And he was saying to me, what I don't like about what Israel's doing is just the revenge thing. I don't want anyone to be hurt, but the revenge thing. And I was almost horrified. I was blown away. I kind of stopped. I said, I hope I'm not out of place here, but revenge. I said, do you mind if I just give you my perspective quickly? And he said, oh yeah, yes, of course. Yes, of course. And I don't think he was overly familiar. He knew who I was from a sports hosting background, but not overly familiar with kind of, my work in this space. And I said, you understand that what Israel is doing now in Gaza has absolutely nothing to do with revenge, don't you? Like I said, it's not like the threat has completely ceased to exist and all their people are home. If they were then going in to bomb and to punish, you could say absolutely. And I said, I'd still probably understand why, because of what has occurred to them. I wouldn't condone it, but I said, but you realize that there are 59 hostages still in Israel, still in Gaza, and that Hamas, the terrorists, still have the capability to kill and burn innocent children in bedrooms. I stood in a room where 3 kids were burned to death. I watched the faces of the blokes who burned them to death on video. You realize that after the first ceasefire that the US brokered, the first thing Hamas did was go on television and say, we will repeat October 7 at the first possible opportunity over and over and over again. I said, and you realize they're still launching rockets into Israel from Gaza. Like, do you understand? It's not revenge. There is not one spiteful, revengeful element of this. They're trying to get their people home, and they're trying to stop another mass murder. And I said, and by the way, my fight is as much for those children in Gaza you just brought up as it is for children in Israel, children in Australia, children in America. I said, it is Hamas. They are born into a death sentence. The existence of Hamas is an automatic death sentence for every child born into Gaza. And I said, the only people now trying to save them is Israel. The IDF soldiers are saving children in Gaza, the more Hamas they eradicate. And anyway, at the end of the flight, he kind of said, you've actually changed my whole position on this. He said, oh, my wife is really like into kind of, caring and open book. And I said, so am I. I said, so are the people in Israel. They and it's just, to me, that actually terrifies me more than anything else, because as I said, a decent person, very, very smart, very, very successful, yet his whole perspective had been shaped by complete falsehoods. And then it makes me think, well, gosh, if he can fall victim and prey to that, someone who's as impressive as he is, I mean, I can't have one-on-one conversations with every single person. So, I mean, I think they fall into a lot of categories. Some are a complete write-off. Some are just useful idiots who they're the same people who were at climate change protests, who were at animal rights protests, who were doing the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests. But then you've got a big group of people. The other example I used, I was in the car the other day and ABC Radio here. The headline was day 500 and something of Israel's illegal invasion of Gaza. And I'm sitting in the car and, my hands tighten on the steering wheel. But in my mind, and 20 years in the media, I always think of my audience, and I think of a 45-year-old single mum in Western Sydney, 4 kids, cost of living crisis. She's exhausted. Her husband's an asshole. She's not going home to read articles about this conflict. It's far away. It doesn't bother her. She hears that. She goes, oh, God, those poor kids in Gaza and Israel illegally, God, they're awful. That shapes her perspective on it. And then she moves on with her day. She doesn't fact check. She doesn't look for other sources. She doesn't have the luxury or the privilege of doing that. So you've then got a whole group of people who are listening to mainstream media headlines and narratives, and that forms their opinion. And then they're not engaged like you are, because these are your people. You live and breathe it. I'm engaged because I care deeply. This is the danger of how mainstream media frame all of this, is that the people who are not on your side are not necessarily your enemies, or people that don't like you, or people that are anti-Semitic. They're people that are falling prey to this very, not even, I don't think it's sophisticated, by the way. I look at it and go, what a crock. But a lot of people do.
What inspired you to want to be a media personality or go into media? Where did that come from?
Well, I started out as a sports sports host. And so when I was younger, I lived in Indonesia for 7 or 8 years. So I lived in the world's largest Islamic population, the country that is home to the world's largest Islamic population, 300 million people. People in our home that helped raise me were devout Muslim women who wear hijabs. I was over visiting them end of last year, going to visit Muslim schools. So I actually grew up in a Muslim country and I speak the language fluently of the world's largest. Of course, besok pagi saya akan pergi ke toko dan mungkin sesudah itu saya akan makan. Oh, saya kurang pasti ya, tetapi saya lapar sekali. So this is the thing. I said, tomorrow I might go to the shops and buy some milk. I'm starving. What else can I get? Just aimless chit chat. But I guess, when we were over there, because we were away from family, my idea was that we would make news videos for my grandparents back home. So I was always chief anchor. My poor little brother had to do weather and he hated it passionately. My sister was a reporter, so we used to make these videos and I would wear one of mum's batik, the traditional clothing of Indonesians, jackets, and do that. And then it just, I loved it and wanting to communicate, wanting to tell stories. I was in Indonesia in 1998 when the Suharto regime fell, which was a very corrupt government. He was in power for 30 years. His children owned every major piece of infrastructure. And I watched a country stand up and fight for their freedom. I watched them take to the streets at Trisakti University shootings. And then I didn't see what I had seen on the streets reflected in the media. And mum and dad explained, it's not a free press here. And I think that really gave me an appreciation of, yes, the media can be scummy. And we've seen examples of that daily, particularly since October 7. But those who are noble and good and decent and who fight for truth and who do their job the way they should do their job, there's almost nothing more important when it comes to helping a democracy thrive and run. And I think this obsession ruined me about telling stories and telling the truth and communicating with people. And so that's kind of where the love came from. But I fell into sport for the first 15 years or so as a sports host, as a sports anchor. And then about 3 years ago, I'd always loved this space. So my dad was a major general in the army. He was then an Australian senator, ran the war in Iraq for a year, the first Australian general to hold a position like that in charge of US coalition forces. He was a superb individual. And the funny thing is, he and I would spend all our time talking about national security, foreign affairs, politics, everything. And so it was always my passion, but I wasn't in a professional capacity able to communicate it. And then 3 years ago, I was poached by the Sky News Australia and then was able to do all of this. But what I found out afterwards, funnily enough, which I didn't quite realize at the time because I was very much into rugby league and tennis and hosting sports, so I wasn't as engaged as I am now. But mum sent me a headline from dad in 2014 when he'd gone to Israel on a mission with a few other generals from America, from the UK, and from Australia to check on our democratic allies, of course, to investigate, because that's what we do to Israel. We hold them to a standard no one else is held to. And this was after dad had run the war in Iraq for the US forces. He was chief of operations for 1 year in that conflict. And the quote and headline, mum sent me a screenshot of it out of an article after dad had, interviewed BB and generals and investigated the conflict of the year before. His quote was, "They put us to shame in how they conduct war." He then went on to talk about the minimization of civilian casualties that he's not done anywhere else. It was not done in Iraq when he was in charge there. There's lots of things I think that have come together that have shown me that I'm in exactly the right place, that I am. And somehow we lost dad 2 years ago, somehow helping to fulfill his legacy and hopefully making him proud in some way. But my world has changed significantly in the last 6 months or so, but in the most incredible way.
Let me ask you, first of all, I'm sorry about his loss. He sounded like an extraordinarily special, impactful person, and you're certainly carrying on his legacy in the most impressive way. I'm curious, what would you say is the what's the greatest similarity between being a sports reporter and being a political commentator, let's say? What would you say? I mean, obviously, reporter, microphone, people, I get it, but is there some strand or thread there where you actually feel like there's a certain commonality?
Yeah. I actually love it. I've never been asked this before, and I absolutely love it. I love this question because I've never thought about it before. But I guess what I'd say to you is when I was hosting rugby league and sport and tennis, the passion that I had was never the game itself or the score or the outcome. It was showing the human side to athletes. And now that's a slightly, I'm not equating the two in any way, shape or form, but my passion was always saying, okay, great, you did an incredible tackle, or wow, you won that in straight sets. That was amazing. But then I'd say, what makes you happy? Right. Or what are you afraid of? Or what did your mum tell you when you were little and you blah, 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 blah. And I found that this was the most impactful way to have people connect. So I wanted people to watch sport who weren't, those hard ass, really obsessed kind of, people that are just, that love it, live it, breathe it. And the way that I was able to broaden the audience was to show the human side. And I look at then moving into this space and political commentary, my obsession is people and humans. And I think that's, with October 7 particularly, one thing I never wanted to occur was for people not to understand that 3 kids died in a room, that 2 babies were taken, that these are not just numbers, that these are people. And the way that I managed to connect with people was telling, I might once or twice on a show, I would show a face, I would have a mother, I would talk about a son, I would humanize people. And that was how I was able to connect and make people feel. And I think it's a similar thing with charities. And I do so much charity work and I host so many charity events. And I would say to the organizers, you've got to make people feel. If you want people to give and to invest and to engage, you've got to make them feel. And whether that's happy, whether that's sad, whether that's hopeful. So I think that the similarity would be the way you connect with people is to make them feel. In the current space I'm in, that feeling is more often than not pain and trauma and horror.
I'll just interject for 1 second. It's very powerful what you're saying, because the challenge of remembering the Holocaust, particularly in the milieu that we find ourselves in, is that the Holocaust was 6 million, right? And that's 6 million individual stories, people, right? That's obvious. And that's why people often try to make the equation just so Americans can feel like 9/11, what 9/11 was, and how many 9/11s, what happened in Israel was, compared to like the size of a place like it's exactly on your point, right? That when it's just a story, it's like it can be forgotten. But when it's
That's exactly.
person, then it becomes real and it becomes alive and it touches people. And that's what you're trying to accomplish. I love that.
That's why, and one thing that really kind of almost knocked the wind out of me, and that I hadn't even, I was guilty of doing as well. I was in Canada maybe 2 months ago, and I met the mum of Alex, who was killed at the Nova Festival, this incredible young man who stood outside a shelter and fought off Hamas until the very end, gave his life. There's video of him from their cameras standing outside trying to save. He saved, 7 lives inside. And she made the point to me. She said, everyone knows the names of the hostages, and so they should, and that matters greatly, she said, but almost no one knows the names of the 1,000 that were killed at and it really impacted me, because there was no jealousy or there was nothing like that in what she was saying, but she made such a valid point that every single life lost is an entire universe and world to the people around them. And there's this, that I talk about my dad all the time, and I think one of the reasons is, he was my favorite person in the world, but someone told me years ago, you die twice in this world. Once when you take your final breath, and the second time when people stop saying your name. And I'm very blessed in that my dad was a public figure, so people come up to me every day, and I get emotional because it's such a privilege to feel so much pain at his loss. And I feel the same amount of pain today as I felt 2 years ago when he died. It's such a privilege to hurt so much because he was so amazing, but I get the chance to talk about him all the time, and I do. And I look at other people who might not have had a profile, who might have lost a son or lost a beautiful daughter, and the world isn't saying their name. And that is a tragedy as well to me, because I think the one thing that when you lose someone you love, you want people to remember them. You want people to know how special they were. And when a tragedy happens, it's usually one person or 2 people. And at the time, a big deal is made and you get to honor them. And I think when something like this happens, the biggest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, there are so many who didn't get that chance to show the world who they are. And that matters to some people. To some people, it doesn't. But to some families, it matters greatly. And I want to try and help share their stories as well.
Thank you for sharing that incredible vulnerability. That's very, very powerful and very moving. I'm thinking full circle. So when you described kind of, I think, being in Jakarta and playing like newscaster with your siblings, and now kind of today, fast forward to where we find ourselves, maybe you'll talk a little bit about 69X and this brand new venture that you've really, this whole new world of media that I think that you are traversing. And obviously Elon Musk has a vision for what X can be, and you're certainly a partner in that. And I'd love to hear just your perspective so far. Tell us a little bit about this new endeavor. Maybe not everybody knows yet in terms of what you're up to right now. I'm sure a lot of people do know, of course, but I'm curious kind of like what you're learning in terms of when you're kind of free to kind of be your own person versus when you're kind of part of mainstream media, and what the differences are.
Actually, again, and I promise I'm not trying to suck up to you, but you've actually just said something that has hit me so hard when you say full circle. When I started doing this as a 8, 9-year-old, I was in, my bedroom at home, basically with a little, VHS camera. And now, however many years later, as a 41-year-old single mum, I'm back in a spare bedroom at home doing exactly the same thing after 20 years on mainstream television and network media. So my Lord, it would be sad if the world hadn't changed so much. And, I didn't know that this was the future. But I mean, my existence has changed so dramatically, but in the greatest way. Last year, I lost every job I had. For the first time in my entire career, I was sacked. And not just from one, but from I had 4 jobs in the media and lost them all. And I realized I hadn't, quite understood that for 20 years I'd lived in this space of complete fear, and not just fear of losing my job because it's a very unstable world, but fear of what people would think, fear of being on the front page of the paper as a loser, fear of all the things that eventually ended up happening to me. And it was at that moment that I went, wait a minute, they were a studio, or they were this, they were that. Everything I say, everything I write, everything I do is all me. I use, I don't need them anymore. My stuff goes viral each week. Millions of people are watching. I have worth and value, even if networks don't see that anymore or don't want me. And it was the most incredible feeling after a couple of hours of sobbing and, Mummy, oh my God, help, panicking. I then went, wait a minute, look at where the world is heading. My stuff when I was on Sky News, I won't tell you the numbers on there, but my show would often be number one. But then 99% of people would see it on X or see it on YouTube. They wouldn't be watching it on Foxtel in Australia at night. And once I started to look into this and understand that this shift was far more significant than I could ever have understood or envisaged, I went, wait a minute, this is the perfect opportunity to just do exactly what I want to do, to control it. I can now shoot. I had Boris Johnson. I interviewed him last night here while my daughter was in the other room. I can do it from anywhere around the world. And I now don't have to balance. When I was on Sky, I was doing breakfast radio, a comedy show. So you can imagine at night, I'm calling on the regime of Iran to stop murdering and feeding proxies and calling out Hamas and dealing with death threats. And in the morning, I'm trying to tell jokes and appeal to a broad audience of people who aren't, invested in politics. And it was just this constant. Now, everything I do is me, entirely me. And it's just the most incredible thing. 69X Minutes. I hate the name of the show, clearly, because it's very crass, but it is a very serious, incredible news show. Elon Musk came up with the name, and Mario Nafal and his team kind of put it together. And look, it's been incredible. We've had 9 world leaders on over the first 9 weeks. We get 15 million views an episode. And, I copped a bit of shtick when I first agreed to do the show, and people said, oh, well, Mario's hosted this person and this person and, blah, blah, blah. And I would say to them, if you want me in an echo chamber, if you want me just talking to Jewish people, then what use is that? I said, if my message changes, if I suddenly soften in my support of Israel, then come for me. Come for me hard. I said, but if I'm going to use this platform that Elon Musk often retweets, that gets 15 million views to a broad audience who may not agree with you, and I'm going to say the exact same things I've been saying for 18 months, then you should push me towards it with everything you have. This whole thing of, oh, you can't go in here or don't go in here. I will use every single platform I can to fight for what I believe in. And that is for Israel's, not only their right to exist, but their right to eliminate the terrorists, just as much for kids in Gaza as for anywhere else. So look, it's been incredible. And it's a platform that's changing the way people consume news. And it's now outrating a lot of shows on Fox. So
when's Elon going to come on?
I mean, still trying. I'm still waiting for him to reply to my emails, but I'm sure I'm a priority in his life at the moment.
I'll tell you something. Let me tell you something very interesting. I just got back from Los Angeles, California. I spent 10 days for the holiday of Passover with my family there.
Lovely.
I was a speaker there, and there was another speaker there who's like a pretty renowned author, and she's been on some very big podcasts. And she shared with me something which I found fascinating, which I think you will as well. She basically told me that going on TV nowadays, like formal, mainstream TV, it's almost like a waste. You get the clip, nobody watches it, and it's a waste. But if you go on podcasts and you go on platforms that basically have they're evergreen and people could come back to them and so on and so forth, that's kind of where things are at today. She said, I thought it was really insightful. I'm sure you're.
Even Scott Jennings, who I was in a meeting with, Linda Yaccarino, the boss of Twitter, John Stoll, who's the head of news on X. Sorry, Twitter. I said Twitter. I'm probably sacked now on X. And there was a group of kind of different people that do stuff exclusively on X. And Scott Jennings from CNN was there, and he was saying, he's on a late night show on CNN that would probably come 10th in the ratings. He said, they call it Jennings porn, I think, because he's the only one with half a brain who's sensible, who shuts down. He wears a hostage pin every week. And his stuff gets millions of views on X each week. So on the actual CNN show, it's minuscule, but the clips then go absolutely viral. So it's, I remember when Piers Morgan moved his show entirely to YouTube. And he's a friend of mine. I've known him for many years. And I remember almost internally being a little bit dismissive of it and thinking myself, oh, how embarrassing, oh gosh, he's failed on real television.
Poor guy, right?
Completely. And then very quickly I went, oh, holy shit, he is just, he saw this very early on, and he is, whether you agree with, I sometimes watch him and go, nailed it. Other times I watch him and go, oh my God, are you serious? Particularly in this issue, we probably don't see eye to eye very much at all. But the future of media is in how we consume it, and it is 30-second, 1 minute sound bites, or if it's longer, it's something longer that is there permanently, like a podcast or like a YouTube show. That kind of linear television where you've got to schedule in and watch it in a certain time is dying, in my opinion, a very quick death. And if you don't jump on board what's happening now, then you'll be left behind.
What's been the hardest part of what you're doing right now?
The hardest part definitely would be the things that I can't control, as in the death threats, the constant targeting of my child. I'm a mum, and my number one job in the world is to protect her and keep her safe, and that matters to me more than anything else. I guess I have enough foresight to understand that what I am fighting for now is the greatest gift I will ever give her, and the greatest gift I will ever give her future is for a world that hopefully takes a little bit of notice of what I'm saying and what others are so bravely saying. And we preserve the things that make this world so incredible and so good. Short term, yes, it's very challenging. It's challenging as a single mum to sometimes have to give her to her father if there are legitimate threats and, things that people in fairly good positions are worried about. That is very difficult. It's difficult going places and worrying about someone doing something when I'm with her and I can't protect her. It's, some of the things I get, some of the things sent to me are very specific and quite terrifying. But again, pick your hard. My hard, I can pick hard right now, or I can pick hard in 5 years. And yes, it's hard right now, but I know that for her, the greatest gift I can give her is to continue to fight in this space and to fight even harder. The more they give me, the harder I fight back, so that one day she will live in a world that sees without any blurriness or grey good versus evil so clearly, and a world that fights to protect. We'll never rid the world of evil ever. That's not realistic. But what I hope to do is help the world in some small way get to a place where we can much more easily identify who is good and who is evil, so that all our kids can live in peace. And I include in that children born into Gaza.
As we're winding down, we're going to ask this one or two final questions, but I want to just comment that I see an incredible thread in your life, whether it's, we didn't get into it today, but whether it's having jumped around to about 16 different schools, if I'm not mistaken, in your youth, and raising a child by yourself, basically a single mom, and then dealing with the trials and tribulations of, just professional trials and tribulations. And you always get up, and even if for a moment, okay, it's not easy, and you're allowed to, one is allowed to kind of, take a moment to go, Mom, what's going on? But obviously, I just want to commend you for your incredible tenacity and fortitude, because I think you see a pattern, that from your earliest years of being able to kind of fight back and excel and overcome. And that's something that I think is incredibly exemplary and a real model to us. I always ask my guests just like just like out of the box questions, like just very simply, what's one thing about you that maybe nobody would know, like something just like that somebody wouldn't guess?
Oh, okay. So when I was younger, I was obsessed with gymnastics. So I would read International Gymnast Weekly, Nadia Comaneci, Olga Korbat. I would watch VHS videos of gymnastics. I was a gymnastics coach. It was my first ever job. And my dream in life was to be a professional gymnastics coach and to have a farm full of horses. That clearly did not eventuate. Now I can't even touch my knees, let alone my feet. So that skill has left me, but people probably wouldn't know that about me. I'm also very tall, so I don't look particularly gymnast-like, but that's probably something people wouldn't know. And the other thing they might know, I love a champagne. I'm Australian, but yeah, love a champagne.
Okay, that's great. And final final question for tonight, for today, depending on where we are, Australia or New York.
Yes.
What's your favorite Hebrew word?
Oh, okay. Now I don't know many. In fact, hardly any. But is this right? I might even get it wrong. Mensch.
Yeah, you used it before. I think you used it before even in this conversation.
No, I wouldn't have. I probably just slurred my words.
Aaron, that's so perfect for this because we're the Allgemeiner. I'm just going to explain something.
Yeah.
There is a Yiddish word that we were founded 52 years ago, our media outlet. Yiddish
Yeah.
word, we used to be a Yiddish newspaper. Today we're an English media outlet. Allgemeiner means universal. So I think it's incredible that you're talking on the Allgemeiner podcast and you picked a Yiddish word, which is of course very close.
That's not
So mensch is a Yiddish word which means like a
like
yeah,
outright, like
like an honest, upright, shade, like
yes.
excellent
People have said
person.
that to me before, so I'm so glad then because as I said, I have almost close to zero experience interacting with your people. I also think one of the first events I did, I was asking someone who was bald how he attached his kipper. My appetite to learn is voracious, so I love that. So yeah, so that's Yiddish, mensch.
Yeah. So okay. So Hebrew word. I'll give you one Hebrew one, which is a
Give
good.
me one.
This is an easy one. Like I think Bill Clinton actually used it when Yitzhak Rabin was murdered, frankly, by an Israeli.
Yeah.
In 1995, if I'm not mistaken. So he came to give a eulogy at the funeral, and he said "Shalom Chaver." It was very well known in the media at the time. He said basically "Farewell, my friend." So what's beautiful about the word "shalom" in
Yeah.
Hebrew is "shalom" can mean hello, it can mean goodbye. It's kind of like it means peace, but the word
Shalom Shabbat.
it's peace. So it's like peace upon you, basically. Hello. So you say like shalom. So it's a great word. Just the word shalom.
Shalom.
Good word to know. You can use it like basically, or if you're coming, if you're meeting somebody, say shalom. And if you're leaving, you say shalom. But you say, I hope there's going to be shalom in the world and shalom in Israel. So I just gave you
What a
like
great word.
five different usages.
Okay, go. Ask me again. Ask me the question again.
Okay, Erin, tell me, what's your favorite Hebrew word?
You would not believe it. Shalom.
It's great. It's a great way to end the discussion also. Wishing me
Thank you.
shalom. Anyway, Erin, I want to wish you continued incredible success in all the work that you're doing, the advocacy for our people, but frankly, for all people of the world, because we all know that, they come for the Jews first, then they come for everybody else afterwards. It's not that far away.
And
People who are smart understand kind of what the big picture here is. Western society, Western values are under attack, just like, we're just the front line. So I appreciate all that you've done. It was so grateful that you participated in our event, and I look forward to deepening our connection and continuing our conversations in the future.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for having me on. And it's such a privilege to stand with your people. And I mean that very sincerely.